you imagine the suffocating silence of a moment that shatters a life into a million irreparable pieces? A silence so profound, it screams louder than any human cry, echoing through decades, leaving an indelible mark on everything it touches. Or perhaps, have you ever felt the chilling caress of a memory ghosting along your skin? A whisper of a forgotten promise, a broken vow that forever altered the landscape of your very soul. Tonight, my dear listener, we tiptoe through the delicate veil of such a memory, a tale not just of shattered hearts, but of the extraordinary resilience that blossoms in the barren lands of abandonment. Close your eyes, let your breath steady, and allow the gentle currents of this story to carry you away into a narrative spun from dust and starlight, a story that begins with a quiet, devastating choice. Picture a world cloaked in the hushed tones of twilight, where the last slivers of daylight surrender to the encroaching shadows. In this liminal space, a small, worn teddy bear lies forgotten on a cold, wooden bench, its button eyes reflecting the fading light, witnesses to a silent sorrow. This isn't just a tale. It's a journey into the fragile architecture of the human spirit, a testament to how the deepest wounds can sometimes, in the most unexpected ways, pave the path to an unforeseen, deeply human courage. This is the story of a soldier, not defined by uniform or rank, but by the fire he would eventually run into. A flame lit by the ashes of a past he couldn't outrun. A fire, you ask? Not a literal blaze at first, darling listener, but the slow, smoldering ember of a father's regret and the searing inferno of a child's uncomprehending pain. Can you hear the faint rustle of leaves in the encroaching dark? The distant, mournful cry of a lonely owl? These are the quiet backdrops to a moment that fractured a family, setting two lives on divergent, painful paths. Imagine, if you will, the palpable chill in the air, a reflection not of the weather, but of the cold dread settling deep in a child's bones. The world, once a vibrant tapestry of sounds and colors, suddenly narrowed to the wallow space left by an absence, a space that would echo for decades. The story is woven from those echoes, a gentle yet insistent whisper that demands to be heard, not with your ears alone, but with the very core of your being. It's a lullaby of loss, a symphony of suffering, and ultimately, a hopeful hymn of healing. Tonight, we don't just listen, we feel, we understand. We witness the quiet heroism born from the crucible of abandonment. This is the prelude to a courage so profound, it will break your heart, only to mend it anew. The air itself seemed to hold its breath on that fateful afternoon, a palpable tension coiling around the small, outstretched hand of a child. Little Ethan, no more than 5 years old, still clutched his worn teddy bear, its faux fur matted from countless nights of comfort. He stood beside his father, a figure who seemed impossibly tall and distant, even when standing so close. The park, usually a place of laughter and vibrant greens, now felt bleached of color, eerily quiet. A single, brittle leaf skittered across the pathway, a sound almost deafening in the looming stillness. Just stay here for a moment, son. The father's voice had been low, a murmur that seemed to dissolve into the rustling leaves. It wasn't a question, but a command, laced with an unfamiliar urgency that pricked at Ethan's young mind. The boy's brow furrowed, a tiny wrinkle of nascent confusion appearing between his innocent eyes. He looked up, his gaze searching his father's face for the familiar warmth, the usual spark of affection. But today, those eyes seemed shadowed, darting, restless. They didn't meet his. Ethan watched, his small heart beginning a frantic thrum against his ribs as his father turned away. It wasn't a quick departure. It was a slow, deliberate movement that felt like an eternity. Each step widened the chasm between them, each receding silhouette of his father's retreating form etched itself deeper into the soft clay of Ethan's memory. The faint scent of his father's aftershave, a scent usually synonymous with safety and comfort, now morphed into an invisible thread, snapping, leaving an acrid emptiness in its wake. The world tilted. A sudden cold wind whipped through the park, as if nature itself was recoiling from what was about to transpire. Ethan stood rooted like a tiny birch tree, trembling but unmoving. He didn't cry out, not at first. A child's mind, in its pure innocence, struggles to comprehend such a profound betrayal. Instead, a silent question bloomed in his chest, a bewildered ache that spoke volumes more than any shout could. Where is he going? A whispered inquiry lost to the indifferent breeze. His teddy bear, clutched ever tighter, offered no answers, only the familiar, plush comfort of a silent companion. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each tick of an unseen clock, hammering a new nail into the coffin of his childhood's certainty. The sun dipped lower, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like phantoms around him, exaggerating the hollowness of his surroundings. The gentle sounds of distant traffic, once a comforting hum of life, now seemed to mock his isolation. The park benches, once friendly perches for families, now loomed like cold, vacant sentinels. A fragile hope, flickering like a dying candle, still kept him company. "He'll be back," a small, brave voice whispered inside him. "He just forgot something." But even that small whisper began to falter, its light dimming with each passing moment of agonizing absence. The vibrant colors of twilight deepened, bleeding into the bruised purples and grays of dusk, mirroring the deepening bruise on Ethan's tender soul. A profound, piercing loneliness, sharper than any physical pain, began to seep into his tiny frame, chilling him to the bone. It was the first breath of a heartbreak, so vast, so encompassing, it would shape the very contours of his being for years to come. The betrayal wasn't a sudden, explosive shock, but a slow, suffocating realization that seeped into his bones. A quiet, insidious poison. And in that moment, under the fading light of a cruelly indifferent sky, the world as young Ethan knew it irrevocably broke. His father, the one constant, the pillar of his small universe, simply vanished, not with a bang, but with a silent, devastating retreat, leaving only the ghost of a promise and the unbearable weight of an empty space. The world, once viewed through the innocent, unclouded lens of childhood, contorted into a jagged mosaic of insecurity and quiet desperation for little Ethan. The initial bewilderment, slowly, agonizingly, calcified into a deep-seated wound, a constant dull ache that throbbed beneath the surface of his every interaction. He no longer cried out, not in the public, bustling halls of the orphanage where he eventually found himself, nor in the succession of foster homes that followed. Instead, his grief manifested as a profound introspection, a quiet withdrawal that spoke volumes. His eyes, once bright with childish curiosity, learned to observe, to analyze, to search for the subtle signs of impending abandonment in the faces of those who fleetingly entered his life. He became a small, silent sentinel, always braced for the inevitable departure, a self-protective mechanism to cushion the blow he felt certain would always come. His conversations were sparse, his words carefully chosen, as if each syllable carried an unseen weight. Sleep, for young Ethan, became a battlefield where the echoes of that Twilight Park scene replayed with chilling clarity. He'd wake in a cold sweat, clutching his worn teddy bear, searching for a presence that was never there, a comfort that had been abruptly snatched away. The simple act of forming attachments became fraught with peril. Every kind gesture, every fleeting moment of warmth, was met with a cautious, almost heartbreaking reserve. He built invisible walls around his fragile heart, brick by painstaking brick, out of fear that giving another piece of himself away would only lead to further devastation. He learned self-reliance at an age when most children were still learning to ride bicycles. He mastered the art of observation, reading emotions in the slight tension of a jaw, the flicker in someone's eyes, the unconscious pull of a hand away from his own. This hyper-awareness, born from trauma, served as both a shield and a burden, protecting him from emotional pain while simultaneously isolating him. His grades were good, often excellent, a testament to his focused determination. But there was a quiet intensity to his studies, as if academic achievement was another form of armor. He devoured books, not just for knowledge, but for the escape they offered, immersing himself in fictional worlds where heroes always returned and promises were kept. As he moved from one temporary placement to another, Ethan carried his memories like precious, fragile glass. He never spoke of his father, not directly, but the absence of that parental figure shaped his entire being. He was a boy without a past he could easily articulate, a future he dared to truly envision. There was an unspoken challenge in his gaze, a subtle defiance that whispered, "You won't hurt me like he did." Yet beneath this hardened exterior lay a deep, almost primal longing for connection, for unconditional love, for a place where he truly belonged. His early abandonment etched itself into his sense of self-worth. If his own father could leave him, what did that say about his inherent value? It was a question that gnawed at him, fueling both a quiet despair and an unyielding drive to prove his worth, not to others, but to the ghost of his past, to the man who chose to walk away. He learned to channel his pain, not into anger or overt rebellion, but into a steely resolve. It was a determination that promised, silently but fiercely, that no matter what life threw at him, he would not break, he would not be discarded again. This fragile boy, left in the gathering dusk, was slowly, painfully, forging himself into a man of quiet strength, a silent warrior against the very emptiness his father had bequeathed him. Meanwhile, the man who had once been Ethan's father, the architect of that profound silence and devastating retreat, walked away into a life he believed would be unburdened and free. He had imagined a world unencumbered by responsibility, shedding the weight of fatherhood like an unwanted cloak. Yet the freedom he sought proved to be an illusion, a hollow promise echoing in the chambers of his increasingly restless soul. Initially, there was a fleeting sense of relief, a deceptive lightness that masqueraded as contentment. He chased fleeting pleasures, immersing himself in superficial relationships and transient adventures, trying to fill the void that paradoxically grew larger the more he tried to ignore it. The faint scent of aftershave, once a comforting marker for Ethan, became for him a ghost, a whisper of a past he desperately tried to outrun. He moved from city to city, job to job, a perpetual wanderer always searching for something he couldn't quite name. something that always eluded his grasp. His laugh, once hearty and genuine, grew brittle, a forced sound used to punctuate conversations that held no real meaning for him. His eyes, though they could still possess a captivating charm, held a subtle, unreadable melancholy, a faint shadow that hinted at unshed tears and unspoken regrets. He convinced himself that the choices he made were for the best, a rationalization he would repeat to himself in the quiet, unforgiving hours of the night. But the quiet certainty he once possessed had eroded, replaced by a subtle, insidious self-recrimination that gnawed at the edges of his consciousness. Moments of genuine joy were always tainted, a faint disharmony beneath the surface, a discordant note in an otherwise pleasant melody. He saw children playing in parks, their laughter bright and unrestrained, and a sharp, unexpected pang would pierce his carefully constructed indifference. A casual mention of a father's pride, a gentle hand guiding a child. These seemingly innocuous scenes became tiny, piercing slivers beneath his skin, reminders of what he had so carelessly discarded. He built a career, amassed a modest fortune, surrounded himself with acquaintances who admired his charm and charisma. But there was an undeniable hollowness in his achievements, a sense of having built a beautiful, intricate cage around himself, adorned with all the trappings of success, yet devoid of true warmth or genuine connection. He craved solitude, not for peace, but to escape the subtle judgments he imagined in the eyes of others, the silent questions about his past that he was too afraid to confront himself. The image of a small, trusting hand clutching a matted teddy bear would sometimes flash unbidden in his mind, a fleeting, almost subliminal flicker that would leave a cold, unsettling ripple in its wake. He would quickly push it away, burying it beneath layers of denial and manufactured distractions. But its persistence was a testament to the unerasable mark his actions had left. Over the years, the initial burst of false freedom had dissipated, replaced by a profound, pervasive loneliness that no amount of external success could mollify. It was the quiet, persistent hum of karma, a slow-burning realization that what he had abandoned was not just a child, but a piece of his own soul, leaving him an incomplete, restless echo of the man he might have been. The weight of his choices, once dismissed, now pressed down on him, subtly but surely, preparing the ground for an unexpected reckoning. Years melted into decades, each one deepening the lines of experience on faces long separated by choice and circumstance. He, the father, now a man in his late 50s, found himself adrift in a life that had spiraled far from the cushioned comforts he once pursued. The subtle hum of karma had finally escalated into a roaring cacophony. His fortunes had waned, relationships crumbled, and the once vibrant facade of his self-made success had cracked, revealing the desolate landscape beneath. Tonight, the air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke and the frantic shouts of distant sirens, a stark contrast to the park's twilight silence of so long ago. He was trapped not by memories but by a very real, very present danger. A multi-story apartment building in the heart of a bustling city he barely recognized as his own was engulfed in a ferocious blaze, its concrete skeleton swallowed by hungry orange flames, licking at the night sky. He had been visiting an old acquaintance, a contact for a desperate, last-ditch investment, when the disaster struck. Now, coughing from the thick black smoke that filled his lungs, disoriented and disheveled, he found himself amidst the terrified throng, pushed to the crumbling brink of a collapsing balcony on the third floor. Below, the ground seemed impossibly far, a churning vortex of flashing lights and shouting voices, a chaotic tableau of fear and despair. There was no escape, or so it seemed. His elegant suit, now singed and soot-stained, offered no protection against the searing heat, nor the gnawing fear that tightened its icy grip around his heart. Panic, raw and unadulterated, began to set in, a terror that eclipsed all past regrets. Then, through the swirling smoke and the blinding glare of emergency lights, a figure emerged. Not a firefighter in heavy gear, but a silhouette, moving with a purposeful, almost preternatural calm amidst the chaos. He was younger, perhaps in his late 20s or early 30s, dressed in a muted, functional uniform that spoke of action rather than authority. As the figure moved closer, his face became clearer, illuminated by the hellish glow of the fire. The father's smoke-blurred vision struggled to focus, but there was an intensity, a quiet determination in the man's eyes that cut through the haze of panic. "Sir, can you hear me?" The voice was steady, resonant, a lifeline thrown into his abyss of fear. It held a maturity that belied the man's relative youth, an unwavering calm that, for a fleeting moment, disarmed the father's terror. He couldn't place it, but there was something profoundly familiar about the cadence, the deep timbre of that voice, like a half-remembered melody from a forgotten dream. In his desperate state, recognition was a luxury he couldn't afford. All he registered was the promise of salvation. The younger man, an emergency responder, moved with an almost surgical precision, assessing the precarious situation. He secured a line, his movements swift and practiced, his gaze firm and reassuring. "I'm going to bring you down, but you need to trust me. Can you do that?" For a moment, their eyes met, and in that brief, intense connection, the older man felt a disconcerting flicker, not of the past, but of something deeper, an echo in his very bone marrow. It was an uncanny sense of being seen, truly seen, not as the shell of a man he had become, but as something more, something profoundly vulnerable. He didn't recognize the finely sculpted jawline, the steely resolve in the eyes, or the way the younger man's brow furrowed slightly in concentration. The years had sculpted Ethan into a man, a soldier fighting a different kind of war, but the foundational architecture was undeniably the same. Yet, consumed by fear and the immediate threat, the father saw only a rescuer, an angel. In the inferno, he nodded, a barely perceptible movement among the trembles, his throat too tight to respond verbally. The young man extended a gloved hand, strong and unwavering, offering not just physical aid, but a silent, empathetic understanding that rippled through the older man's rapidly fracturing composure. It was a comfort he hadn't realized how desperately he craved. The tension in the air, charged with danger and impending revelation, thrummed, a silent prelude to the storm about to break. For Ethan, the controlled chaos of the fire was a familiar battlefield, a place where his training, honed by years of dedication and a quiet, almost surgical precision, took over. Yet, as his eyes met those of the man teetering on the edge of collapse, a shiver, unrelated to the encroaching heat, snaked its way down his spine. The face etched with fear and the grime of smoke was undeniably older, softened by time and hardship, but the bone structure, the faint scar above the left eyebrow, the peculiar shade of hazel in the eyes, it was a ghost from his most painful memories, A gasp, unheard amidst the roar of the blaze, almost escaped him. It was him. The recognition was instantaneous, a visceral punch to the gut that threatened to unravel the cool professionalism he had so painstakingly cultivated. All the years of yearning, of anger, of silent questions, coalesced into a single overwhelming wave. He felt the familiar, cold ache in his chest, the same one that had settled there in that twilight park, now sharp and immediate. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the backdrop of crackling flames. 1,000 conflicting emotions flashed through him. Bitter resentment for the unhealed wounds, a profound sadness for the lost childhood, and a shocking, unwelcome surge of pity for the vulnerable, terrified man before him. He saw not the callous figure who had abandoned him, but a broken man, stripped bare by fear, utterly dependent on a stranger's mercy. He quickly averted his gaze, focusing instead on the task at hand, the meticulous securing of the safety line. Every practiced movement, every precise knot, was an anchor against the emotional maelstrom raging within him. He forced his voice to remain steady, resonant, a testament to his ironclad self-control, even as his internal world crumbled. He couldn't afford to falter, not now, not when a life hung in the balance, even if that life belonged to the man who had shattered his own. A strange, almost perverse sense of justice flickered within him. The man who had left him to die, metaphorically speaking, was now looking to him for salvation. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about something far deeper. His years in service, his unwavering commitment to saving lives, had forged a code of ethics that transcended personal pain. He was a rescuer. And this man, no matter his past transgressions, was a person in desperate need. And then, as their eyes met again, in that brief, intense connection, he saw a flicker of something in his father's eyes. Not recognition, but perhaps a fleeting, almost animalistic echo of familiarity, buried deep beneath layers of fear and denial. It was like seeing a faint, broken reflection of himself in a distorted mirror. A part of him wanted to scream, to rail against the unfairness of it all, to demand answers to questions that had haunted him for decades. But another, stronger part, the one forged in resilience and an unyielding will to overcome, simply focused on the present. He would save this man, not for forgiveness, not for reconciliation, but because it was who he was. It was his duty. It was his deepest, unshakable truth. The full weight of the years, the entire unspoken story, rested in the single, steadfast extension of his strong, gloved hand. The tension between them, unseen and unspoken, pulsed like a fragile live wire, connecting two souls bound by a shared dramatic history, now teetering on the precipice of an unimaginable revelation. And in that moment, as Ethan secured the final carabiner, he knew, with a chilling certainty, that the true fire, the one that would burn through all the years of silence and pain, was yet to come. The descent was a blur of smoke, fear, and the surprising strength of the younger man's grip. Once on solid ground, amidst the organized chaos of flashing lights and concerned faces, the father collapsed, coughing, his body trembling uncontrollably. The rescuer, Ethan, knelt beside him, checking for injuries, his touch professional, yet carrying an almost imperceptible tenderness that burrowed its way past the older man's shock. "Sir, are you all right? Can you breathe properly?" Ethan's voice, devoid of the earlier urgency, now held a softer, more direct concern. as Ethan removed his smoke-grimed gloves, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. A small silver locket, suspended on a thin, almost invisible chain, slipped from beneath his uniform. It caught the harsh glare of an overhead light, spinning gently. The father's eyes, still watery from smoke, fixated on it. He squinted, trying to make sense of the tiny, intricate engraving on its surface. A faded, almost imperceptible E nestled against a smaller M, intertwined with a delicate edged bird. A robin. A tremor far greater than any caused by fear or smoke racked the father's body. His breath hitched, no longer from coughing, but from a sudden, terrifying jolt of memory. The locket. His locket. The one he'd had made for Ethan's 5th birthday, just weeks before. The one with his own initial and the first letter of Ethan's mother entwined, a symbol of their small, fragile family. He'd told Ethan it represented the robin, whose song, he'd said, meant that new life always followed the cold winter. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers brushing against the cool metal. Where did you find this? He rasped, his voice raw with disbelief, his gaze darting from the locket to the rescuer's face, tracing the lines, the contours, the almost impossibly familiar curve of the cheekbone, the set of the jaw that had once been soft and round. Ethan's eyes, which had been so steady, so controlled, now held a profound, aching vulnerability. A silent, knowing sorrow settled within them, deep and ancient. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The quiet strength he had maintained throughout the rescue began to waver, just slightly, at the edges. The truth, too heavy to keep contained, hung in the charged air between them, a tangible presence. He simply held the older man's gaze, allowing the recognition, the inevitable, horrifying clarity to dawn. The father's face, slowly, grotesquely, contorted. Disbelief warred with dawning comprehension, then absolute horror. His eyes widened, fixing on Ethan with an intensity that was both terrified and heartbreaking. The meticulous features, so similar yet so different, coalesced into an undeniable reality. He saw not the stranger who had saved his life, but the grown-up version of the child he had abandoned, the ghost of his past made flesh, standing before him, not with accusation, but with a silent, profound understanding. His own son. The realization struck him like a physical blow, stealing his breath, emptying his lungs of air. Ethan. The name was a fragile whisper, a plea, a question, an agonizing acknowledgement. It was a sound ripped from the deepest, most buried chambers of his heart, choked with decades of silence and regret. Tears, hot and stinging, sprang to his eyes, not from smoke, but from the brutal collision of his past and present, delivered by the hands of the very person he had wronged. The world around them, with its sirens and shouts, faded into an indistinct hum, as the universe, in its own cruel and poetic way, delivered its most profound, most personal reckoning. The silence that followed the whispered name, Ethan, was more potent than any roar of flames. It stretched, taut and trembling, between father and son, each second laden with the unspoken history of decades. Ethan watched, his own face a mask of complex emotions, the residual anger, the raw pain, but also a startling vulnerability, a recognition of the broken man before him. He saw the tears carving clean paths through the soot on his father's cheeks, saw the trembling hands, the shattered composure. The moment didn't demand words, not yet. Instead, it was an exchange of souls, a profound, aching understanding, that transcended language. The father, stripped of all pretense, of all the carefully constructed layers of denial, simply reached out, his hand hovering uncertainly, a question in its hesitant gesture. He was seeking not just forgiveness, but absolution, validation of a remorse that had slowly, insidiously poisoned his life. Ethan, without a word, slowly lowered himself completely, meeting his father's gaze at eye level. His own hand, the one that had so steadily guided his father to safety moments before, now lifted, not in anger, but with an almost hesitant grace. He reached out and gently covered his father's trembling hand, a silent acknowledgement of the pain they both carried, albeit for vastly different reasons. There was no grand declaration, no explosive outburst, just a quiet, profound act of connection. "It's been a long time," Ethan finally murmured, his voice husky, tinged with an unshed sorrow that softened the sharpness of his words. It wasn't a question of blame or a demand for explanation, but a simple statement of fact, acknowledging the chasm that had existed between them. The father's shoulders sagged, relief washing over him, mixing with a fresh wave of grief for the lost years. He could only manage a choked sob, clutching Ethan's hand as if it were the last anchor in a storm. He didn't deserve this moment, he knew, but in his son's steady gaze, in the gentle pressure of his hand, he found a fragile flicker of hope, an unearned grace. It wasn't instantaneous forgiveness. It was the quiet opening of a door that had been sealed for too long, a tentative first step on a long, arduous path toward healing. In that chaotic scene of fire and rescue, amidst the flashing lights and blaring sirens, a new, far more profound fire had been kindled, the slow, tender warmth of reconciliation, born from the ashes of a devastating past. It was a silent conversation, a negotiation of wounds and wishes, of sorrow and salvation, spoken not with words but with the raw, honest language of two hearts finally, fearfully, reconnecting. And so, the quiet heroism of a son, forged in the crucible of abandonment, ultimately led to the unexpected redemption of a father. This whisper of a story reminds us that life's deepest wounds, though they may scar, do not always have to define us. Love, in its most unexpected forms, can bridge the widest chasms, and forgiveness, whether given or received, possesses a profound power to heal, offering a second chance not just at connection, but at a peace that truly surpasses all understanding. Our choices echo through eternity, but so too does the capacity for change, for empathy, and for the enduring, quiet miracle of human connection.